My name's Tara Flood. I'm a disability rights activist of many years. I'm really excited by this year's theme for UK Disability History Month because I think none of us can deny that there's been a huge amount of work done to increase levels of accessibility, particularly physical accessibility. I think the DDA in '95 really was a watershed moment in terms of improving access generally. Certainly with regard to transport, I can say that because I live in London and the public transport system feels incredibly accessible compared to where we were, I don't know, what, 20, 30 years ago. I know things are different outside London. I think the definition of how we talk about disabled people and the accessibility of language around that has moved on incredibly. The language of social model of disability compared to where we were 10, 15 years ago, it's not quite mainstream, but we're getting there in terms of talking about the barriers that we need to remove rather than disabled people ourselves having to change how we are. I also work at my local authority, which is the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. But I'm doing this interview in a personal capacity rather than in an official capacity. But a couple of years ago, I chaired a Disabled People's Commission for the local authority, and we were given a blank page in terms of what we wanted to focus on. And we knew as disabled people, we were all disabled people on that commission, that we were furthest away from decision making. So we decided to focus on co-production as a way of changing the conversation about disabled people's place at the table. So we produced a report, the Nothing About Disabled People Without Disabled People report, and we set out step by step in that report what was required to move us from where we are now, furthest away from decision making, to being at the heart of decision making, particularly around policy setting and service design and delivery. When I think of the conversations that we are now having, moving social care, which has traditionally been incredibly disempowering for disabled people, to a conversation about what that would look like in terms of an independent living service for all disabled people, irrespective of age, background, impairment, that we are moving to a barrier removal service rather than the traditional service that sees disabled people as passive recipients of services. This is mind-blowing stuff. And it's because disabled people have campaigned for years and years and years for access to influence. That's what that's about. These ideas have come from us, but the ideas are our own. I think it's crucial that disabled people who come from a rights perspective, who come from a real understanding of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, who fundamentally understand the 12 pillars of independent living, are on the inside too, because we are there to disrupt and to influence and create solutions for the change that we've been talking about as a movement for what, 20, 30, 40 years. So yeah, it's tricky and it takes time to embed that change, but it's crucial that we are on the inside, but that we are also on the outside. So I think there is still an awful lot to do, whether we are working for local authorities, whether we are working in grassroots activism. First one, it's really important to make sure that the people in power, whether that's local, regional or national, recognise the value of working with disabled people, seeing us not as obstacles, but as partners in that change. I really want to see a recognition and a commitment to working with our own organisations, with disabled person-led organisations, to not see working with the big disability traditional charities as being a quick win solution. So I think one of the big successes at Hammersmith and Fulham was the political support that local disabled people secured in the lead up to a local election. And I'm thinking we have a local election coming up in about 18, 16 months. And I think that's the opportunity for disabled people in London particularly to start to work with local politicians and start to think about having a conversation about particularly what the local public sector equality duties are and what some of those priorities and objectives are. Because what we were able to achieve in Hammersmith and Fulham is particular objectives around co-production with disabled residents to address inequality and inaccessibility. And then once you've got those in black and white, you can start to work with local politicians. And we started to shape with them what needed to be included in local manifestos and asked very particular questions about what their commitments would be to increasing levels of equality and accessibility and inclusion for disabled residents. And then we started to mobilize disabled residents to think about that and to start to raise those questions in the build up to the local election. And when you think that we've got a local election coming up in 16 months, now is the time to start that work.